Hey everybody, we are in Wooster, Ohio at Grace Church, and we have an incredible story to tell. Pastor Nick is with me, and wow, crazy stuff has happened here. Has blown my mind. I've been a consultant with Injoy for going on 16 years now, and what I saw happen here was nothing short of the hand of God. You've got some amazing stuff to share, and so I'm honored that you would sit down with us today. We also have a couple of other guests with us, and we'll let them introduce themselves. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, family, how long you've been pastoring?
Yeah. My name is Pastor Nick Cleveland, and I've been here at Grace Church for over 20 years. I've been the lead pastor for just under 10. My wife, Vicki, and I moved here to be the youth pastor years ago, and we have 3 children, and they've kind of grown up in the church. And then we went through succession back in 2016, where I took over the senior leader following a guy who had been here 37 years. And under his leadership, God had been very faithful. The church relocated, went through a series of building campaigns. The last one was our Next Gen Center, our student ministry center, when I was the lead of our student ministries. And it had been about 15 years since we have done that. And so our church went through a lot of transition in leadership, and we were kind of ripe. And what God did in our campaign was nothing short of a miracle, only God.
Yeah, only God.
Amen.
Yeah, so we also have another guest with us.
Hey, I'm Jeff Walter, so I'm our operations director, and with this came a lot of the finance side of the campaign, and so I've been on staff for around 8 years or so, but love working at this church and love working with Nick, and it's been an awesome fit.
That's awesome. And one last guest over here.
I'm Matt Yost. I've really grown up in this church. I'm a board member here. I'm not on staff, but I've attended the church for almost 40 years and have the privilege of serving in a variety of capacities. I've been a part of all of the building projects that we had at this church. Served with Jeff as the co-campaign chair for the next project.
Yes. So, pastor of the church, and for the purposes of this conversation with a campaign, the 2 campaign directors that co-directed together, wow, it was an amazing journey. So we are past commitments about 4 months now, something like that. And we're seeing that the giving is actually outpacing what the commitments were at this point. So everything that happened up to Commitment Sunday, as good as it was, it's getting better and better. But I want to roll the clock back. What was the genesis of this? What made you come to the point where you're like, something needs to happen? God gave you a vision of something, and you realized things could not stay as they were, and this was going to be a big deal. It's going to take money. It's going to take a leap of faith. How do I go into this? What was going on? How did all that start?
Yeah, we're a church that's 85 years old, and we have a huge sprawling campus that had been built over years. But while we're one church, we're multi-venue, so we have different services and different rooms, and our main capture venue is in a gym. And so we're 85 years old, and we're still doing setup and tear down every single week, which is fine and everything, but we were outgrowing our gym. And coming back from COVID, we saw a strong response returning to church, and we went from 1 service to 2 services, and then ultimately to a 3rd service. And, conventional wisdom says after you get to that 3rd service, you better have a plan. And so we started looking at our building during COVID and like, what kind of changes would it take to make the layout work better? Also to give us space to reach more people in our community, and to have a permanent worship center home. And so we started dreaming about what is next for our church, and that ultimately became the campaign theme and the focus of how we could continue the mission forward in the next chapter of our church.
Because you do have a very nice facility, but I remember driving up for the first time going, which door do I go in? Because there's a lot of doors, a lot of entrances, and you're going to fix all that because that's what visitors come in thinking.
Exactly. We have, multiple entrances, maybe a dozen or so doors people could go in. Moms, especially single moms, that would come with their family and they wouldn't know where to go. We have a team attached to our First Impressions team here called the Welcome Here, New Here team. And they literally have shirts on that say New Here ? and they're looking for people that are lost in our building because it's so sprawling and can be a little confusing. And so we're hoping to solve some of that with a better layout, better flow to help families.
That's incredible. Looking for people that are lost.
Yeah, quite literally.
Right.
Spiritually, literally, the whole 9 yards, yeah.
So how in the world did you get hooked up with Injoy?
Yeah. I was on a sabbatical a few years ago, and after our board went through the process of saying, hey, let's take another step and maybe try to address this, we kind of had the thought that this would be a multi-phase campaign, the number of things that we wanted to do. I had never led a campaign. Our senior pastor who was here before me was on staff for a little while afterwards. He was becoming fully retired, and we wanted to make sure that the first campaign succeeded. So I did some interviews with multiple consultants and kind of just did the pros and cons, which I would recommend any pastor do.
Yes.
Get multiple voices in it, see what works, what you like, what you don't like, how it works for you. For us, Injoy had a breadth of experience. Tons nationally. They had seen situations like ours, situations that weren't like ours, and brought a great deal of experience and a timeline and a plan that probably benefited us with where we were in our search. So yeah,
Very
so
cool.
it led me to Enjoy.
Very cool. And you guys had been to one of our seminars years ago, right?
Yeah, back when we first addressed this before our succession, our current senior pastor, myself, and our executive pastor went to a campaign,
Okay.
a mini conference in Atlanta for a day or two, and we were trying to address a few different issues, thinking about it, and we learned a lot there. So we were familiar with it, and we're familiar with Joel and his ministry through the years, and so it was one of the lead names for us.
So did you have a feel for what this would cost the vision that God had given you? Were you that far along?
I had an idea, but it kept getting bigger. The more we got into it, for sure. I didn't think our church could, and even looking at, all the consultants have their metrics, and it was well beyond every single one of them. And so as we looked at, common themes of that, we're like, this is 2 or 3 times what people say our potential is. So this is probably a multi-phased campaign. So yeah.
I wrote a book, shameless plug. I wrote a book called God Honors Movement. And in that, one of the things I said is that any pastor worth his weight in anything has a vision that is much bigger than the apparent provision. And you found yourself in that place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I remember standing in front of the church when we went to the public phase of the campaign in the first week and saying, hey, we're working with a consulting company and experts, and they say we can raise this much money. Now, here's this vision, and it's 3 to 4 times the amount of that. And then I literally said, and you're going to wonder how we're going to make up the difference. And I don't know.
So
this is a faith venture.
You have the numbers guy beside you here.
Yeah.
How are you handling all of this as he's sharing with you the vision and you're realizing the numbers keep stacking up?
Yeah, well, and that's part of it, is that really where this progressed from a reasonable vision and a reasonable dollar amount, where we figured we could piece it together with a campaign and then taking on some debt or whatever. Whereas it continued to grow, I think we all kind of got to this point where we're like, this is going to take a true act of God. Like this is no longer possible to do all in one shot and kind of come up with the man thought through way to get there. It took only a God move. And so that's exactly what happened for us, which is amazing to look back on. But yeah, no, I think the funny story that Nick and I would tell throughout this summer was, one day he'd wake up and he's like, we're going to get there. This is going to happen. And I'd wake up the same day and I'm like, there's just no chance. and then the next day, I'd sleep on it. I'm like, you know what, Nick, I think you're right yesterday. And then he'd show up and he'd be like, man, you're crazy. What are you thinking? There's no way this is going to happen. Right.
Back and forth.
And it was every day that it seemed to go back and forth like that. And again, what's so cool to look back on is just how God did move.
Yeah.
So you're an elder, your vote matters, your voice matters. You have a big say-so. When did they approach you in the initial stages of this? And what did you think?
Yeah, it was very early on in the process. So 2020, 2021, somewhere in there when the idea was spawned. And frankly, Jeff, I was skeptical at the beginning. I mean, on the board, one of our responsibilities is to be good stewards and to really discern what we should be doing with the finances of the congregation. And so my initial thought was, well, let's try to retrofit what we have and let's try to be good stewards here. And if we reorient and renovate, maybe we can save some money. And as we got into looking at the drawings and the estimates there, it became pretty obvious that that's not a good use of funds and it's not much more to just build. So that's when I kind of started to see the vision that, yeah, this is a possibility. This could work. And then the number, like Nick said, just kept growing. It's like, ugh, how much debt are we going to need to take on? And is this possible? But frankly, once we really made that decision that, hey, we're going to make this pitch, for some reason, I had a sense of peace about it. I just felt like, if God wants this to happen, he's going to bless it. It's going to happen. I was never really concerned. I was surprised when I found out how much our congregation gave and how they responded. But it truly was, as they said, an act of God. It was, I don't want to go so far as to say a miracle, but it was just an amazing movement, an expression of what our congregation believes in this church and in what they believe in their Savior.
That's exactly it, is that our church has experienced the growth here. Again, not to brag on us, but we were one of the fastest growing churches in 2023 in the country, right? We were like 97.
That's before the campaign.
Before
You're
the
one of the
campaign.
fastest.
And so we're seeing this growth. We're seeing the life change. We're seeing the stories. And so it was this, one of the first things you told us in the initial meetings was this wave of momentum that we wanted to have, right? And so that's what the campaign was going to build for us. And honestly, God was working the whole way through before the campaign, where that wave of momentum was building and building, and it crashed in a good way, as you would have described it before too, where it crashed in a great way, where people just came through with generosity like we didn't expect. We know we have wildly generous people, and yet they came through in a way that we were blown away by.
I'm curious because, Matt, you're a businessman. You're in the business world. You handle a lot of stuff, a lot of money. But these two guys talked you into this somehow. And the rest, how many elders do we have?
We have 11 total, counting myself, so 10 others, yeah.
So they talked all you guys into this. Was it difficult? Was it a difficult journey for the elder board?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we try to be very discerning in what we do. And, you get the questions of, well, should we be spending this money on ourselves? Should we be planning campuses? Should we be giving this money to missions and reaching people that way? And all those are very viable uses of money. But these guys are very persuasive, and they make very good arguments and very biblically sound arguments. I'm not saying that they pulled the wool over our eyes. It was all very, very grounded in faith. But yeah, once we sort of caught the vision, the board was all in. And everybody was rowing in the same direction, promoting this, really building it up and talking to their friends and influencing people around them to see if we could make this thing happen.
I got to say, he's being very gracious. And as a leader, I got to tell the whole story. I had a vision for half of this, which I thought was a bold vision beyond the provision.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to present it to the board at the wrong time in the wrong way. And I own that. It was a miserable presentation. And I was like, guys, you got to go with this. And you're like, I'm presenting this. And they're like, I don't see it. And as I kind of went through that and evaluated my own delivery of it, my own understanding, I didn't really communicate the why very well. I went back to our board, and this is part of, I think, leadership and my growth in this. I had to own the fact that I didn't do that well. That they didn't buy the vision because of them. They didn't buy the vision because of how I presented it. And so I said, hey, would you give me a second chance to pitch this? And our board was extraordinarily gracious and said, of course. And I started with the why, which changed the project eventually. Not right away. The why was so important for us. And so we got there really early, and he's being very gracious. But yeah, so you got to learn to use the voices that God has brought to your church, right? They're there on purpose and for a reason.
Right. But I like that you didn't, after you approached the board with it, they didn't go for it. You didn't walk away and go, well, that's the Lord. He just said no.
Right.
You knew you had the mind of God.
Yeah.
this process brought the unity that we needed in the campaign, where if everything just kind of falls in order, there's no faith, there's no trust there's no team building, and all of those challenges along the way brought this unity, like I said, that made for a great campaign.
Well said. Yeah.
You brought up something that so many pastors deal with. How do you know when to add on to your current facility, when to plan a campus, when to send it to missions? You mentioned all of those. Those are very valid conversations that even some pastors struggle with. How did you guys get through determining what should we do?
Mm-hmm. It was a process, and it wasn't sequential. A lot of it overlapped each other. We had just launched our very first campus 2 years before this. And so we were in the early stages of that. And that was like a 5 to 6 year paradigm shift, in our thinking to get to that point. And you could make the argument we should have done this first. You could make the argument we should launch our third campus or fourth campus before we do this. I think it has to do with the collective time in prayer, conversation where we bounce ideas off each other, an overall vision for what we're doing and where our mission partners at. And we do have a missions component to what we're doing. And one thing we didn't want to do is pick a number for our missions projects and say, we're going to do this percent or this number. We actually went to our mission partners and said, our theme is next. What's next for you? If you don't have a vision for what's next, then maybe this campaign isn't exactly a fit. And that led us to the mission projects we were able to include. So I think it was all of it. It was our voices, it was our prayer, it was time in the Word, and kind of just going through it slow. COVID helped. We weren't in a hurry because we weren't doing much, during that time.
Right.
But we redeemed that time and allowed the Lord to lead the timing and the pace, I think.
So
you guys can add to that, yeah.
Yeah, for Jeff, I would say for me, because I wrestled with that. Is this the best use of our funds, and should we be doing something different? And I look at the way, in my mind at least, that I justified it is I look at the lives that have been transformed in our church, the growth in our church, the way, and I know a number of these people that have come to this church not knowing the Lord, hearing the gospel, having their lives, their families' lives, their kids' lives transformed through the gospel. And they're adding to our numbers each week and growing and growing. And so how do you put a dollar value on that? You can't. And missions has impact, campuses have impact. But for us, it just felt like we're seeing so much growth and transformation here. And the baptisms, you guys know the numbers, but it's incredible what the Lord's doing here. And it just felt like, God, this is what you want. You want more space for more people in this community and around this community to come hear the gospel and get to know you.
So Jeff, that decision of planning a campus or sending the money somewhere or giving to the homeless or building more facility, how did that process go through with you?
Yeah, and that's something we say here is that we really do want to be an open-handed church, right? And so we realize, and maybe it's a cheesy illustration, but if you're clenching on to what you have, more can't come in, right? And none can leave. And so we want to be a church that is giving beyond our walls, that has a pulse on our community, that has a pulse on our region. We want to be invested wherever God's moving and people's lives are being changed. We want to be invested in it. And so, yeah, there's this campaign brings a ton of different opportunities in order to get invested in a variety of ways, whether it is, with our additional campus or whether it is across the world or right here in our backyard. We want to see lives change, across the board.
Amen. Was there any for any of you, was there any particular verse that kind of gave you that strength in the times of weakness? Because from a consultant's perspective, I'm standing off to the side and I'm praying, Lord, you got to come through for them. You got to come through. I'm not even in the driver's seat. You guys are the ones bearing all the weight of the pressure. So there has to, like you just mentioned, sometimes you were having a strong day, sometimes he was having a strong day and vice versa. But is there a verse, any scripture that you kept coming to?
For me, the why was the Great Commission, to make disciples of all nations, and the Great Commandment to love God with all your heart and love your neighbors yourself. But to get me through those, it was a reminder from Jesus in Matthew, I will build my church. I'm not trying to build his church. My success and failure doesn't rise or fall on a campaign. I want it to be successful. I pray for it to be successful, but I had to trust in the Lord that He's going to fulfill His promise to build His church. And we believe this is our way of doing that right now. For me, that was a significant relief to have to try to carry any burden. And I think eventually we started seeing Ephesians 3:20 and 21 come out. He can do more than I could ever ask, think, or imagine. He was blowing our minds in what He was doing in the hearts and lives of people, not just the whole, the individual that made up the whole. So that kind of guided me.
On the spiritual side, we developed this 21-day spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Obviously something that Injoy gave to us as a challenge towards things. And you said from the beginning, hey, this is going to be the backbone of the campaign. And it really was. I think back through when we launched and we said, hey, here's what we're thinking, but don't give anything yet. We don't want any commitments yet. We want you to walk through this, a 21-day devotional, and it's chock full of everything that you just said, whether it's one verse individually or each verse every single day that's in here. That's what changed the campaign. That was the value, is the discipleship aspect of our people had to come face to face with generosity, with what they're seeing here, with who we want to be globally. They had to come face to face with that through this 21-day spiritual journey. And that changes everything, man. Like that's the point. What do we care if we're going to put up a building or if people are going to give some money if we're not going to make a difference with it?
Right.
That's why we're giving.
We said it repeatedly in the campaign. If we raise money and build a building and that's all we do, we fail. That is not the primary. That wasn't why we started this. We started this to make more room to reach more people with the gospel. Right. And so we said that publicly and internally, personally too. It changed us.
And every day, it's something that I've said multiple times and I pray for, is that we know there's people that are driving down the road, Burbank Road right out here, every single day that don't go to church here, that will in 5 years. And that's what we want. We want that person that it passed by and they're like, man, I just drove by that 1,000,000 times, and their lives are going to be changed in our new building when they have the opportunity to come and check something out for a Sunday or an Easter or a Christmas or whatever it is. They're going to come for the first time. And that's what we're praying for. That's what we're giving for.
Yeah, for me, the parable of the talents really comes to mind. And I think God has blessed this church with wonderful leadership, with a heritage of gospel-based preaching. And we can hold on to that, like Jeff was talking about, and just use that for our congregation and just hold on to it tightly. Or we can invest and we can build and we can grow and take risk. And so I feel like that's really what we're doing here. We're fulfilling our obligation to invest our talents, to expand, to grow so we can share the gospel.
Amen.
One other thing to add to that is that, we had a large dollar amount that came along with our campaign for us, at least in our rural context. And as Pastor Nick would present it, he's like, okay, so here's what the cost is going to be. But actually, let me ask you, what's the cost if we don't do this?
Oh my.
And that's a game changer too. It's like, yeah, you're right. What if we don't? What if we don't make more room for more people and we become what is classic for an 80-year-old church and we just get all about ourselves and look inward? Man, that is not something I want to be a part of.
Man, that's so good.
I'm very blessed being around people like this. Like I really want to emphasize the value of listening to the pastors and leaders, to your leadership teams, your boards, and your key contributors and stakeholders in your ministry. I've learned so much being around. The process, more than the product, was almost more valuable to me as a leader. Because I'm learning just listening to them today.
It was interesting to me too, when we first started our conversations, I was the brakes. Nick was the accelerator. And then once he kind of convinced me, yeah, I see the vision. Then it was like, Nick, why do we stop? We need to do this. And Nick was like, well, okay. So we kind of flipped roles.
That's funny.
Yeah. To me, the project and the vision was so big. We had a person in our church that was kind of coaching me too, and they had raised some money other places in some public, scenarios. And I was like, well, maybe we should scale it and I'll present this part of it. And they kept saying, you can do that. You won't get that. And you'll never get all of it. and they kept saying, pitch the whole thing. And I was worried we were going to get stuck at the 2/3 mark, which, by the way, was double than what the experts thought our potential was, right? And I'm thinking, if double what they think our potential is only 2/3 of the way, what are we going to do? We don't have enough to get to the rest of the way. This is going to be, we're going to get, there's going to be a trouble. Pitch the whole thing. And so it's another voice I was listening to, like, hey, this person has wisdom and God is speaking collectively. So the collective voice of the church really matters. It's not really, it wasn't my vision. Maybe I started it. Maybe I got the spark going a little bit for us. This was our vision, really.
So if it started with you and then it went to the elders, how'd you handle taking it to the church?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where Injoy really helped.
Okay.
And I'll say this because I'm not convinced that I would have wanted to do all of the meetings that you made me do. I met with 519 people the summer before our launch in various sizes and settings. And I've never grown more as a leader. Sitting there with my wife in these dinners, listening. We brought a rough draft. Like we said, it kept ballooning. We brought something, and through the 519 meetings with people or people that we met with, it actually went up another, third the price, because that was the feedback we were getting. I'm like, well, if this is what the church is saying, then we should listen. And it got even more ridiculous. But I learned how they view life. I've learned about how some people are incredibly generous with not just their money, but their abilities and their skills and what they value in our church, why they love our church. I feel more confident as a leader, and I had to get to a place, Jeff, where I actually believed in the vision. And I kind of wonder, as a pastor, if I didn't have Injoy with me, I might have skipped a few of those and maybe justified it with, that's really busy. It's a lot of work. I've never worked harder than in a campaign. It's a lot of work. That's high pressure. I don't know if I want to meet with those people. They don't really want to hear me pitch this vision. They're going to, all of those reasons that pastors, we all give, I've given them myself. I get it. But it kind of held me to the standard and the timeline to do it. And regardless of the outcome, at the end of the summer going into the campaign, we already won.
Why do you say that?
Because the leader listened to the church, and we were one church. Our vision is to be one church, united around our mission, thousands of locations. We're the hands and feet of Jesus everywhere we go, and maybe a few campuses. That's our vision. One church, thousands of locations, a few campuses. I understood the thousands of locations, and we were one church. We already won.
I think that culminated when we had our leadership launch night. There was a different buzz in that room than any night that I've experienced here at this church. It was a rally where I was up on stage, Matt was up on stage, Nick got up, I think, and kind of launched things. And like, it was almost like no matter what you said was going to be met with applause. Like, people were so jacked up. They were just so excited, man.
We were in the office that day, and I'm insecure as a leader. I think all leaders are insecure. And I looked at Jeff, and I was like, this is a bad idea. This event's going to be terrible.
The leadership launch?
Yeah, this is a terrible idea. It's going to be a bad night. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. I don't really have anything new to say. I get up there, and I'm like, God has been faithful for 85 years because we've been focused on the gospel. And they all applauded. They don't do that for my sermons. I don't know what was given. It was like, we walked out. I was like, that was one of the best and sweetest moments ever.
That's amazing.
As a pastor, watching our church spend the last 30 minutes of that gathering praying together. That was rich.
It was that for me. And then there was two of the things that really stood out through that entire process was we made it through those dinners, we made it through all these interactions and all these things, and we kind of got to this moment of commitment time, and we were having then some follow-up one-on-ones with some of our families, and we had some spectacular interactions, right? But probably one of my favorite ones was we had a family that we expected probably to give a little bit, a significant gift, really, and Nick and I were able to sit down with them, and we found out more about their lives, right? And we found out that maybe things were a little more of a challenge than we initially expected. And we were able to just, with that pastor's heart, be able to say, hey, like, we're done talking about the finances right now. We're going to pray for you. We're going to care for you. Here's what we want for you as kind of next steps. And we didn't say you can't give, but we said, actually, why don't you wait until year 2 or 3 of the campaign, get things in order, get things right. And if you want to, jump in. And if you want to jump in with $5 right now, it's all good too. It was like we wanted this opportunity to care for them. It's because it's not about the dollars, it's about the people, and we want to see the people grow. And that was what was best for that family. So that was one thing that really stood out. And then I think the other that is key is, I think so often, because of that insecurity and those things that you already mentioned, Nick, is a lot of pastors, maybe they do have one of those interactions to ask for a significant gift. And maybe they ask once to have the meeting, and maybe the text isn't responded to, maybe the phone call is not responded to, the email, whatever it is, and they give up. And that is a big mistake. We wanted to not to pester people, but we realized if we're really going to do this, we have to follow through. And sometimes that took 3 texts. Sometimes that took a second phone call in order to get the meeting set up. And some of our biggest commitments were from just persistence, and where I wanted to quit, and Nick's like, we can't stop now. We've got to keep going.
Can I piggyback off that?
Yes.
I think this is important for me and maybe other pastors out there. You guys organized it well, led us to the place. I'd met with 519 people. I could have stopped there, then done the public. And I realized what I'm asking and the vision of this is so astronomical for us. I'm not going to stop there. I want to close the loop. And that's where we took a giving chart and sat down with some targeted leaders to close the loop and say, listen, this is kind of a ridiculous ask.
And you had already met with them.
I had already met with them once. This was follow-up, at least once, and said, here's how if we're ever going to get there, this is how it's going to, kind of play out. What do you think? Now, I'm not sure in any of those appointments that we exactly got what we thought maybe, but I'm confident if we wouldn't have done it, it wouldn't have happened. And that took me getting over my own insecurity and saying, I believe what God is asking us to do as a church enough to say, look at this. Where do you see yourself? Is it possible? And we invited some other voices into those, some strategic voices in our church. Jeff was involved in that, and other people were involved in that, because we were kind of protecting the senior pastor a little bit in those, because that's probably, I think, the fear that maybe a lot of your listeners would say, the high pressure situation.
Right.
It actually wasn't. You know who the pressure was on? And we're transferring it over the person. Not one person was offended that I asked.
Quite honestly, honored.
Very honored.
Do you think that's about knowing your audience and the approach that you take?
Probably. I think so. We had ongoing relationship with our key contributors. We had met with, some of our top givers before in brunches and whatnot, and just casted a little bit of light vision, nothing related to the building. We did a mini campaign, not even 10% of what we just did the year before to help a need. And so we had done a few things where we had gained some credibility and relationship there. And so you know your audience. It would be really hard to close that final gap if you don't know who they are. And I know that's very controversial in the church world on like knowing who the top givers are and all that. But I think for us, having the relationship was key.
Yes. And you don't have to know exactly how much they gave. You just need to know, are they in this world?
That's right.
That's exactly it. And I think the importance is that whether or not you want to know the numbers and you don't, is we want to know who's bought in, because we can't take a vision to people that aren't bought in. And so we want to go to the people that are already giving and already committed to the church. That's where you have, a significant commitment towards.
You go back to those gatherings, those 519 people we met with. I got to tell you one story. It was hard to fill those at some points, right? It was over the summer. It's hard to fill them. We had an assistant that maybe made a mistake and invited someone. They thought they were coming to a small group Bible study. I knew the person. They'd been here a long time. And I was like, no, come in. And they're like, I don't belong in that gathering. I'm like, no, come in, absolutely. So I figured, this person was going to get a free meal and enjoy being in on hearing about a vision before everybody else. Did not think that person had any capacity at all. And ended up, when the campaign happened, made a pledge for a 6-figure gift. And this is truth. I made a secretary call in a coy way to make sure it wasn't a typo, because I was like, no way. So the greatest mistake that we even made, invited people in. Pastors tell me all the time, I was hanging out with a group of 10 senior pastors the other weekend. Oh, we don't have people that have capacity in our church. Don't believe that lie. Because God owns a city on 7 hills.
Yes.
Like, listen. I don't know if they'll give, but they won't if we don't ask and have a vision for it.
So her getting to the church didn't reflect that she had capacity to give to a vision like this.
Not a top contributor.
She had
And
built a rental business and sold a couple of rentals and gave it to the campaign.
she wasn't offended when she showed up and you're talking about vision.
No.
And her giving proved that she wasn't offended.
It's amazing.
That's a cool story.
So much so that when she dropped off that first check with tears in her eyes, was like, I love this church. This church changed my life. That's why I'm giving at this clip.
What did she say when you had an assistant call her to verify?
I think it was, again, I was standing there. It wasn't on speakerphone, but I think she kind of laughed and was like, no, it's for real. It's just because it was pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, it was pretty. We just didn't want to add wrong either. I had the wrong number.
Jeff, I got to chime in a little bit on some of these things. These two did, I was in a lot of the meetings, not nearly as many as they were, but these two did an exceptional job in the way they presented to the congregation in the small groups and the larger groups. In my role outside of church, we were in a sales industry. And we always say that the sales are made in the uncomfortable situations. And you have to push yourself and you have to make an ask that isn't always comfortable, but that's when things happen. And it kind of took some pushing here too, because asking for money is not an easy thing.
Do not enjoy it.
But the way they presented the vision, the way they framed the ask with actually putting some dollar figures and categories of giving, and we're going to need some people here, and asking them, who else might you know that we should be talking to? The way they approached it was exceptional. And I think that's a lot of what drove the results. I'll say too, when it comes to the meetings that they hosted, that our whole team hosted, Nick did an excellent job of setting a tone of humility and garnering buy-in. I think he could have very easily gotten up and said, our board and our staff, we've done the research and we were working with a consultant, and this is what we think we can do, and this is what we need, and here's how we're going to get there, and we want you to come with us. But it was not a top down. It was very much hey, here's the growth we've experienced. Here's the heritage of our church, of sharing the gospel. Here's what we're feeling called to do. We want you to help us. What do you think? What should we be doing differently? What should we be considering? And as he said, the price went up by 50% after we asked those questions, because they said, well, the lobby's not big enough, and well, you need to have more seats. And so slowly our constituents really bought into this and felt like, hey, I'm taking ownership in this too. And we used their ideas. I mean, it wasn't just a token ask. We actually made some changes based on the feedback we received. So I think they did an excellent job of just setting that tone of humility and garnering buy-in from the congregation.
So we took the pitch deck, 519 appointments, and got feedback. And all the ones with my wife and I, my wife took notes on every person's feedback. We gathered all that feedback. And all the other gatherings, I invited our senior staff and beyond to join those gatherings and stand at tables afterwards and listen. I want you to go find a table and tell them what you think of it. And we just garnered all that feedback. And then at the kickoff, I presented the tweaks. I said, you all were invited and you came and you heard this. Well, this is what you said. And so now we're asking this. It was listening.
What did your wife think about going into a campaign?
Well, she is very quiet and reserved, and so she is not an upfront person. She actually thrived in the dinner settings where it was her and I and 3 or 4 couples. She really enjoyed that. And she just got to share a little bit of an update of our family. And then she believes in what God is doing in this church, and our family has been transformed by this church. And so she shared that and then listened. And then afterwards she would say, hey, that person said that. Did you catch that? And I'd say, no, I didn't, because she's smarter and more observant than I am. And I said, that's a really important thing that you picked up on. So it was a team. Ministry happens best when it flows out of our marriage. So it was very much a team there. She serves in different areas than I do. And so this was one of those shared experiences. And so she was excited and still is excited for what God's doing.
You said ministry happens best when it flows out of our marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
And it doesn't look the same for any leadership couple. You got to be yourself and let it flow out for how it works for your marriage. Some couples, both of them will go up and speak. For us, those meals actually were a wheelhouse, I think, for us as a couple.
That's so good. So it's interesting, some of the things you focused on, because if there's anywhere in a campaign that a pastor is tempted to skimp on, it's meeting with high capacity leadership in the church and sharing the vision first and doing these meetings, doing these dinners. They want to consolidate them, do one big, huge gathering. How do you feel about, you could have thrown everybody in an auditorium at one time. Do you feel it was more effective by gathering in small groups like that with them?
Way more effective. Being one voice in a group of 10 is different than being one voice in a group of 100. And you'll hear better from those voices in groups of 10 that are carrying significant weight of it. And that helped us see that. Now, the last gathering that we did, of all of them, because there's 3 different levels, we actually went outside. And I would encourage churches, there's times when you know your context and you have to make decisions that are best for the church. And, we might have even debated it a little bit. The last meeting, we opened it up to our whole church. I didn't want anybody going into the campaign saying they weren't invited. They didn't all come. It was the biggest one of all of them, but they didn't all come. But they were all valued. And everybody's input was valued the same. That whole fear of favoritism was not true when you're inviting everybody to come and listen and everybody to come and share. We took their input the same as we did in the first meetings with, high capacity givers. It's way better in small settings. Way better.
And Jeff, I think high capacity givers appreciate being asked, especially in a small group setting. So if you're invited to a group with 2 or 3 other couples and the leadership of the church recognizes you in this aspect, and then they're asking for your help, it's people like that feel like it's a compliment. And I think they want to give, rather than being in a group of 500 people receiving the same information and the same ask.
But it's not like high pressure. It's not timeshare type atmosphere.
Not at all. No.
Nobody likes
the meeting we were in it was not high pressure. It was just, hey, this is, and I knew what we were doing, but I still was in one of the meetings and just pitched it very comfortably. This is what we need, and we need people at this level and this level, and you kind of, I don't know that everybody knew necessarily a level they fell into, but they knew, hey, based on the people I see around this table, I'm honored to be here, and I want to help.
So Matt and his wife were one of the very first ones. And so he got to hear the pitch early on. And this is where he talked about our roles reversed, right? And he came back to me, he's like, you have to say we're going to need somebody at this level, some people at this level, and some people, you have to say that because people need to understand that's what we need. And I was nervous and I was scared and I was like, oh, okay. It was
uncomfortable.
It was uncomfortable. Right. Yeah, very uncomfortable. But it was the nudge that I needed if I'm going to believe in this. And, pastors were really good at standing up in front of the church and asking everybody to have a moment of faith. That was mine. I was going to give to this campaign. My wife and her are all in. I don't have enough means to be, one of the key contributors of that. But that was my moment of faith. Do I believe in it enough to invite people to be a part of something that big?
And I'll share a personal story. I've got some friends. Well, starting off on this campaign, I had a number in mind. I just figured, I talked with my wife, this is probably what we're going to give. And I've got some friends that were in similar circles. And I challenged them. I said, hey guys, what if we get together and we raise this much? Wouldn't that be incredible? And then we started having conversations with each other. And by the end, what I had planned to give had tripled because of the people that I was talking to that were in these circles. and we all kind of got inspired and caught the vision together. And so people can, and had we not done these small groups and it would have been one big congregational meeting, I probably would have stuck on my first figure.
That says it better than I could.
That's an incredible story. So a lot of pastors worry about being labeled as a money guy. All he wants is our money. Did that ever go through your mind?
Every day.
Every day?
Yeah. And I don't like talking about money. I understand the value of teaching on money, and I know the facts of how much Jesus said about money, and I've heard those stories too at every conference that he drags me to. And it's true. I don't want to be known as that. But if you're going to be a person of vision, you're probably going to get misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to, at the end of my life, I want to do something for the kingdom of God and with the gospel of Jesus Christ that's visionary. I don't care if it's big by the world standards, but I do care if it's big by the kingdom standards. And if that means I'm misunderstood by some, frankly, probably cantankerous Christians, so be it.
Well,
How's that?
That's a great answer. And you kind of have to be that way if you're a leader and you're doing something that's world changing. But I like how I have heard from you that the leaders around you speaking into you are such an important part of this, that if the leaders aren't bought into a level that you can speak into him in areas where he's feeling a little weak, it just wouldn't be as successful.
Right. It's the collective voice of the church.
Mm.
Like last time I read the New Testament, that's the value of a plurality of leaders, right? It's not on one person.
Mm.
That's almost maybe dangerous. But I don't think that was actually something that I did in this campaign. I think that's probably something that I practice pretty frequently. We have a pretty collaborative approach to our senior leadership team. Sure, I have a role. Sometimes I have to make some decisions and move us on. But man, I want everyone's voice who should have that voice in the conversation, because it's better. The more the buy-in, the better the outcome, right?
So do you feel like, going from that very first meeting where you pitched vision and the elders shut you down, and then you came back and you
Thank you for reminding me
again, and then now you're going to the whole new level of everybody who means anything in the church, who can move the needle for resources. Now you're talking to them. How do you feel Injoy helped you in creating that narrative and what to say and how to say it?
Yeah. Well, I think you helped me it's a sermon series, right? Because you're going very public. And so we've done the leadership, gathering, and we have it all laid out. The timeline is very helpful. There's probably some things included in there that I would have either skipped, omitted, or chosen not to do because they're uncomfortable. You kept those in front of me, and the team that leads it kept them in front of me. Taking the pitch deck and shifting it into sermon form was significant. I even know a church that's kind of like a sister church of ours about an hour and a half away from here. They're doing a campaign right now, and they're not using a consultant, and they stole that idea, even some of my jokes in it. And so I'm like, hey, your ministry there is being, multiplied into their life. And then kind of just laying out the response card, right? The commitment card, and how to put it in front of people, but tell them wait to go through the spiritual journey. All of that together, we maybe would have gotten some of that, but having someone there to put it together was very important on this first campaign for me to succeed, if that makes sense. Without you, I think we would have maybe stumbled onto some of it.
Mm-hmm. You're the project manager that kept us rolling through the whole thing.
Yeah,
very good.
Which is worth its weight.
Mm-hmm. In the very beginning, you and I were talking. We didn't want this to be a fundraiser.
Amen.
We wanted it to be a spiritual journey. Can you talk a little bit about how it wasn't a fundraiser, that it was a spiritual journey?
Yeah. That gets on to the group level.
Okay.
All of our groups did the 21-day journey in some sort of, study with that. And so I'm in a group too with my wife and I, and listening to people talk about prayer. They're not sure that they're praying of prayer of faith, fasting, not a spiritual discipline that they had done regularly, and generosity, not something they had challenged themselves in. So that's different to me than fundraising, right? And those concepts were transformative by the Holy Spirit nudging them, and listening to their transformation stories are priceless. And so it happens on all those. We're hearing stories all the time of people like, oh, one of the key things for me that I just fell in love with was kids giving to this campaign. We probably had 24 kids in our church not connected to our kids ministry, which was raising money, that have jobs in family businesses that the kids turned in their own commitment card for 3 years, one of them in the thousands of dollars, to a campaign. I wrote every child that did that a personal note. And I told them that when we go into that building, they should know that they built it, right? What will God do with that in the next generation? If that's how they're forming as a teenager, with generosity and the spiritual formation. I want to know that kid when they're 50.
Right.
Amen.
Personal story. My oldest daughter's away at college, and she knew what was going on, and she was aware of my involvement as well. But she went through the 21-day study with us because she was home over the summer, and then ended up, whenever it was time when we made the pitch in November, whenever it was, she watched the video and sent me a text afterwards and told me just how much she loves our church, and told me how much she had pledged. And it brought me to tears. I mean, she's a college student. She doesn't have a full-time job. I know how much she has because her bank account's tied to mine. Yet she felt so strongly about our church and what we're doing that she chose to give. And as a parent, pretty meaningful.
Amen.
I'll share two real quick. Sorry.
Yes.
Talking. You talk about this not being a fundraiser. And I think Nick did an excellent job from the start in having that spirit. I remember one of the first times we were in your office talking, he said that he believes this will galvanize our church. And my initial response was, come on, you're trying to sell me on this, right? Galvanize our church. But it's so true. I mean, as we went through the process, I always say in our business, success begat success, and people want to be part of something's momentum, and that's growing. And when you see results, especially on a spiritual level, they get excited. And where our church, I mean, we were a healthy church when this started, but where we are now, from my perspective on the board, is incredible. The way this campaign has really brought us together, given us something we're all pushing for together. We all see the vision, and it's exciting.
That's so good. So let me ask you guys this. If there's a pastor out there that's trying to decide whether or not to use Injoy, is there something that you could say, because you know what's going through the minds at that phase? I don't. Is there something you could say to them?
Yeah, I think Nick already mentioned it once, but as the finance guy, it's like, all right, let's look at the price tag. And you're like, nah, I think we can do it on our own.
Yeah.
Like, we'll figure it out, right? But seriously, with you being the project manager, keeping us on task, having the phone call when we needed to, again, it wasn't, you never came and said, you have to do exactly this, and this is the only way you're going to do it. You gave us the freedom to do it in our context, but at the same time, then to be the sounding board when we needed it, to be able to keep us on task. So again, from now hindsight, it's like, yeah, no, it was worth it. Every single day was worth it, the price tag.
And you're in the business world, you're an elder, you felt like it was a good decision.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to, if you're going to do a project like this, you need to invest a little bit of money, obviously, on the front end and throughout to make sure it's successful. And I think the return on what we spent working with Injoy was exponentially more. It was a great decision for us to work with Injoy, just to keep us guided through the process.
I would say, I want to go to sleep every night thinking about vision and the spiritual condition of our church, not the project management details of a campaign. And what they said is exactly right. You have to invest some, and you can look at the price tag up front, and it's a lot. Every consultant I looked at was a lot. But you spread it out over 3 years, or however long your campaign is, and you start going, oh, wait a minute, is that really worth it? Yeah, I would rather you handle the administrative project management details, and I dream on how to make them us. then get bogged down in doing both. I'm not sure that the dreaming happens quite as well if you're doing the administration.
Jeff, I would take the question Nick asked early on to the board. How much would it cost us not to work with a consultant like Injoy? And it's hard to quantify, but the amount of time these two in particular would have to spend on logistics and organizing and planning, it's hard to quantify that cost, but I would say we're absolutely better off working with professionals like this.
Absolutely. Thank you. That means a lot. We have a team of financial analysts. They're scattered throughout the country, but all they do all day long is they take church data that you provided from here, and they crunch numbers and they do financial analysis. They do a forecast of capacity projections, and they're pretty good. They're really good at what they do. I mentioned earlier, I've been working with them for almost 16 years. And when they run a church's financials, and they produce this extensive report, they say, based on your trends, here's what we feel you can raise on a low end and on a high end. So they did that for you guys. We all sat in a room and we went through the data. And their forecast on the high end, how did that make you guys feel when you saw what they forecasted? Did it disappoint you? Did it scare you? Was it what you expected?
Yes.
Okay.
It was what we expected. It did disappoint us when we started seeing what our project was, and it scared us to death to try to do the whole.
Mm.
At least that's from my trip.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. That's exactly right.
because you do want to know the state of your flocks, and you do want to make wise and good stewardship decisions. And nobody wants to be the front page of the paper from being a fool in a campaign like that. And the gap between the high end of the projection and the reality of this project was astronomical. We were asking our church, who had done multiple campaigns, but it had been over 10 years, to give almost six times the amount of money that they'd ever given in a campaign. Like, that was a huge ask.
I think that the difference between the analysis and what came in was all in relationship. It was in, we built relationships before the campaign, through the campaign, and leverage those, not in the way of sacrificing the relationship, but leveraging those relationships. That was a game changer. God came through, and we had the trust of people. It just that was a difference maker, was the relationship. Because I think if it wasn't for those relationships, we probably do fall right within that category of what we were expected, and it would have been a spectacular campaign.
Success.
It would have been amazing.
It would have blown the numbers away.
And the difference of a God-sized story is, God coming through and again working like crazy towards building those relationships.
But you can't build those relationships without doing all of those meetings,
Mm-hmm.
which is where most of the work is, meeting with your flock.
Yep.
A good shepherd smells like sheep.
There you go.
And I would say you smell like sheep.
Thanks.
You have met with you have met with the flock. So when you're the numbers guy, we did the projections. Then you went through the spiritual journey. You went through the 21 days. You were doing the sermon series. You're speaking faith. You're casting vision. People are praying, seeking God. They know what it's going to take. They've seen all the numbers. But in the end, when they all gave, percentage-wise, how did it stack up, the results? How did it stack up against what our team forecasted? And let me preface it by saying this. In my experience of working with hundreds of church leaders over 16 years, our analysts, they're pretty much spot on 90 to 95% of the time when they say, here's what you can raise. But in your case, there was an anomaly. God showed up.
Yeah. So just percentage-wise on the top end, I mean, we were 300% over what was the top end of the campaign. Within when we did our leadership commitment night, we called you, I think the next day, I think is when we called you, and we had already had a successful campaign right then and there, because we crossed that basic threshold. And yet at the same time, it wasn't the vision that we had to continue on with. But yeah, no, it was that's again what was so daunting. Was we believe that those people are doing it all day long and nailing it most of the time, and we're like, I think it's different here, and I think we're going to see something happen in a different way here. And obviously, in hindsight,
And it scared me because you said, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
And it really isn't about the number. It's about God and how he, moved in people's hearts and lives. And you don't get that if you don't go all in.
Giving is a heart issue.
Yeah.
And if the hearts of the people aren't touched,
Right.
they don't give.
Right.
So anything else you'd like to share with any pastors or church leaders?
I just think if I could reiterate a little bit, I know the vision is, seemingly the hard part, but I think it's actually the easy part. We have a dream. You get collective voices into it. You have this vision. The hard part is overcoming our own insecurity to go into the uncomfortable, which ironically, the people who are able to fund some of the vision find is a compliment. And so the question I would give to senior leaders as a friend and a colleague in ministry is, do you really believe in it? And do you really believe in a God who can? And I know you'll say yes to that. Then be willing to go a little bit to the uncomfortable, like you preach all the time to your church, and see what God will do. I don't know if he'll do it, and he might not, but I bet he'll do more than he was going to do if he didn't try.
That's powerful, because I remember sitting in your office, you said something along the lines of, there was a shift in you when you looked in the mirror.
Yeah.
And you can correct me if I get this wrong. You looked in the mirror and said, do you believe enough in the vision to be able to look someone else in the eye and ask them to buy into it? Is that kind of how that went?
I believed in enough of the vision to believe your numbers. The gap between them, I didn't until I had to do business with the Lord. That was my personal campaign, was going, okay, I believe God can. Therefore, I'm going to see. I don't know if he will, but I believe he can. And at that moment, it turned the campaign to something different for us, if you will. And he did, which is amazing.
So do you feel like that across the board, church staff and leadership, do you feel like everybody's faith has been strengthened through this process?
Yeah, no, this is one of the coolest chapters of my career. This has been amazing to be a part of. Our team, it was a win for everybody. Everybody from the single mom that gave $1 to the person that gave on the high end, in significant gifts. Everybody gets a win. That is huge, man. And it's we're only halfway through, because not just the campaign, but what's going to happen that when in 10 years we get to look back on it, we're like, you see how many people are here now that weren't here before?
We maybe had 5 other elements, very small elements relating to the project that we were just kind of like in a dreamland thing. We're in those now. We're talking about what if on some other scenarios. And that doesn't happen unless you go through the process and you believe it, right? Yeah. And you talked about a windfall or whatever the Lord is seemingly doing in this moment and being prepared for it. I had an incredibly large vision or so I thought, and it wasn't enough. Only God. The cool part is no one can say that Injoy did this. No one can say that Nick did this or Jeff did this or the board did this or Matt did this. This is a God thing. I don't have the formula other than asking yourself if you believe in enough to see.
Faith without works is dead.
Amen.
Anything you want to add?
I have the privilege of having 40 years of history here, and every church, I'm sure, has cycles of ups and downs and highs and lows, and our church is as healthy now as I've ever seen it. And yes, the campaign did help galvanize it, but I think the Holy Spirit is present here. There's an energy in our church and what we're doing. People sharing the gospel, people being bold in their faith. It's a pretty special time at our church.
Do you guys feel like that spiritually, that when you step up and you make bold moves to where you think God is calling you to, like scary, bold moves, do you feel like that moves God? Do you feel like that causes him to step up? Do you, in ways that he wouldn't if you just sat and didn't do anything?
Well, I would say, well, here's what I can tell you is that if you're not prepared, God's not going to give you more than you're able to handle, right? Whether that's people for a special event like an Easter or Christmas or whatever, or it comes to a vision like this. Is I love the story that we had along the way of a quote unquote failure on the initial pitch to where all of that brought us together and gave us a bigger vision and allowed us these opportunities to talk with people and to keep it moving. And yeah, God moved here in a way that I've never seen before. And what else can I point to than that?
I don't know where everybody would be at theologically that listens to this. So let me take it to a different level. Pastors, if your people don't read the Bible, what happens? So of course there's action that initiates the movement of the Spirit in your life.
Well said. Well said.
You can decide the rest for yourself, but we all know that's true.
Yeah,
It's good.
Yeah.
let's just talk raw numbers if you're okay with that. What is the church budget, and what did Injoy say that you could raise?
Yeah, we're a little over 4.6 million on a budget, and Injoy said between 4 and 6.5 million, and then again, as of
3 years.
in 3 years, right? And so as of now in commitments, mind you, our church put in about 400,000 in the year before, just because we had a little bit of a surplus coming out of our budget. But we've received 17.6 in commitments, including that 400,000. So 17.2 million from our church. And quite honestly, it's like, as much as they were rolling in for a while and it slowed some, like we still got a commitment like a week or two ago, like it's just, they keep coming in. And yeah, and even crazier is some of that momentum that really built was, as we had some significant gifts come in, we had some upfront gifts come in. We then, like, for instance, again, my family, Nick already said, is like, I don't have capacity at anything near the top end, right? But as I saw these high end givers give, I was like, you know what? I think that we can stretch. And here's how we're really going to sacrifice: is we're going to go all in on our gift. So like we wrapped up our 3-year commitment within the first 2 or 3 months, and that's what we saw. And like and I don't say that to people in a pressure way, but when people come to me often as the finance guy, like, well, how soon do you need this? I'm like, well, it's over 3 years. Do as you need to, right? But I also want you to know there's been some momentum towards going up front. So no pressure on you. But if you want to, man, people are going in early. And because of that,
I didn't even know he was doing that.
how about the sales, Matt?
You know it.
So at the current moment, we're up over $12.2 million received in the bank. And again, blown away by that number because of that then, and where interest rates are at. We aren't building quite yet, but we're able to receive even more based on just very conservative investments. They're like talking like, year-long CDs, those kinds of things, treasuries, like all that. But because of it, we're going to have additional margin towards our campaign that we weren't expecting at the front end.
How much, just ballpark, do you think, because so many people have given up front and the money is there and we're not building yet, and you've got that invested, about how much extra will their first fruits, will that bring in over time from investment?
Should be closer to the $500,000 range.
So another $500,000, just because people were willing to say, I'm going to do it now.
So one of our highest commitments, ends up being because people just gave early.
That's incredible.
That's awesome.
That's
Only
awesome.
God.
Only God. So I want to wrap this up with a little rapid fire.
Okay.
This is called Fact or Myth, because there's a lot of facts out there and there's a lot of myths out there about churches with campaigns. And I'll give each of you all a chance to respond to the question. So, question number 1, fact or myth? When you launch a capital campaign, people will leave your church. And I'll start with you, Matt.
Myth.
Myth.
You know what? I think that one's nuanced because I think it's a myth, and yet you're gonna have somebody that's frustrated. But here's what I don't think is that they're not leaving because of the campaign. They're leaving because of something else.
Oh,
So I'll throw that out there for you.
good work.
Can we keep him to one word?
Myth.
Fact.
It's a fact.
Because of what he just said. Whenever there's movement of any kind,
Mm-hmm.
people get shaken a little bit and they think about something a little different. When we went through succession, I'd been here 15 years and preached my heart off. Nothing changed, but people left. I could take that personally, or I could go, God was saying, do you want to be a part of this church right now in this season? So of course, that's probably going to lead to somebody.
So it didn't happen to a degree that even an elder noticed anything.
No.
But that if somebody's already ruffled about something, they're looking for a reason to exit.
Or even not ruffled. They're just unsettled in their own soul.
Okay.
We got to stop in leadership thinking that we're supposed to lead someone far from God to Christ and then to disciple them. And then they start serving, they get in a group, and then they lead other people to Christ, and then they have families, and then they raise their kids, and then they get old and they retire, and then they die, and then we bury them. And our job is to do all of that. Oh, I love that when that happens. That's special.
Mm-hmm.
How about we just pastor the people in front of us right now collectively to take their next step?
I like it.
Very
good.
Can I nuance mine?
Yeah. All right.
I will grant you, yes, you may have some people that leave. And I agree with Jeff. It's probably because of another reason. And they're likely going to another church that fits what they're looking for, which is great. But for every person that leaves, my guess is you gain more than just one. So at the end, when you look at the aggregate, I think you grow.
Wow.
Well said.
I know it's a one-word thing, but that's where it's
You don't get to answer two
no, I think that I do too.
You call that a rapid fire?
We want health, man, and this has brought health.
Yeah.
So good.
Great point.
Next question. Fact or myth? When you launch a capital campaign, money will leave the general fund to support the campaign. I'll start with the finance guy.
So here's the challenge is that I really do think that is a myth. We did not see a drop in giving, in September through Christmas. Our January and February is always a little bit soft. So we're kind of at the spot of we had a 6-week gap of a little bit of soft in there. At the same time, we're right back to where we need to be currently on weekly giving. So no, I don't have anything that ties to that to say, oh yeah, once you do a campaign, you're going to drop off. And quite honestly, with 12 million already given and 17 something committed, if it was directly correlated, we'd be down a whole lot more, right? It was just we had a 6-week period of a couple of soft weeks, but snow up here in Ohio and all that, it's part of it.
So the other two, any ripples, any undertones of any of that going on from your perspective?
It's hard for me to comment on it. I would say I haven't seen anything. And frankly, I think a lot of that comes down to how you communicate it up front. You've got to communicate that, look, this is designed to be above and beyond your normal giving. We need your tithe for our operating budget to continue our mission here. What we're looking at for the campaign is above and beyond.
It's 100% a myth. And it does come down to communication. We have historically done an end-of-year Christmas giving, which a lot of churches do. We say this is above and beyond, and we'll do $250,000 annually at the end of the year. We have giving to support some orphans in Cambodia and Thailand through our missions. It's above and beyond, right? And our budget keeps going up appropriately, and people still give, it all comes down to how you lay it out. I think the fear is it's fact, but the truth is it's myth.
Well, there's people that we have here at Grace that weren't giving to the budget that started giving to the campaign, and that was their on-ramp. And I'm convinced that in 3 years, when they're done giving to the campaign, they'll still be giving to the budget as well. So quite honestly, it's probably the reverse, that you're actually going to grow and I think we shouldn't think of it in the way, and that's what I was pointing to, is that we shouldn't think of it in the way of like a month or a 2-month thing. If you look at a multiple year process, and that's where you're going to see giving go up, definitely.
Incredible. Question number 3. Fact or myth? A capital campaign will strengthen the relationship between the pastor and his leaders. Pastor, I'll start with you.
It should. It better be fact, or it's probably going to fail.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with just humility and collaboration. For me, 100% fact. I feel like our board is stronger, and our board's been able to coach me, and I've been able to receive, and I've been able to lead better, and it's a win-win-win. Yeah.
So you were in some of these meetings, and you watched this whole process somewhat in the leadership, but also from a different vantage point. What's your answer?
Yeah, I would say in our case, it was absolutely fact. I think the staff, the bonds with the staff are very strong. And from a board perspective, as Pastor Nick said, our board is probably more galvanized now than we've ever been in the last few years, at least. I could see how, if not communicated correctly and if not gone through the proper discernment process, there is a bit of a risk there. But in our case, it was definitely strengthened.
Fact.
Fact.
I would even
Just
say
gonna stop at one word.
Wow. About time. Not just kidding. I would say too, like, there's probably, of course, an anomaly to this too, but if it's not strong, you probably shouldn't do it. That would be my friendly advice.
Very good.
Work on that first.
Number 4, a capital campaign places unhealthy pressure on people who do not have much to give.
Myth.
Anyone?
Myth.
Myth?
Yeah.
Myth?
Myth.
Number 5, a capital campaign is a lot of work.
Fact.
Fact?
Double fact.
Double fact?
Fact.
Fact. There's no disagreement there.
I've never worked harder and never been more rewarded.
Wow.
Spot on. Yeah. That was so much fun.
Yeah.
Man, that was awesome.
You're being serious.
Yeah. That was a ton of fun,
100%.
man.
Yeah.
A lot of work, but it was fun.
So much fun.
It was rewarding.
Yeah.
So much fun.
Number 6, a capital campaign will give the pastor a reputation of wanting money.
I don't care.
You don't care?
Myth.
Myth.
I'm going to say myth. I don't
Myth.
think so. I would have communicated properly.
And you're in the community more than anyone else
Yeah.
on this set right now, so you would know if that's how the town is talking.
I don't. Well, and I don't know that the whole town knows yet.
Right.
I've had some conversations with some bankers, attorneys that I'm friends with, and they're shocked.
Yeah.
When I say, hey, we're doing a capital campaign and it's fully funded at $17 million. Incredible. So
Speak strength to the community of this church.
about what this church is doing, about what God is doing through this church. Yes.
I'll give it just a quick one, was that I have some friends from my hometown in Northwest Ohio that really aren't churched. And I had the opportunity through this campaign really to witness to them on the fact that God's moving here. Here's what God has done in my life. And they're so fast to be the people who's like, oh, well, you should give that all away. And I laid out for them the vision of, actually, guys, the reason why we're building this is to make room for families just like yours. Your kids, we want them at our church. And literally by the end of this conversation, there's so much more to it. But my friends, kind of jokingly like, so where do I send a check to? Like they were at that spot of the vision was so clear and so strong where they're like, okay, I get why you do this.
Yeah.
This is a game changer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I think you've already answered this, but we'll do it. The last question of the rapid fire. A capital campaign, fact or myth, capital campaign helps a pastor become more rounded in his communication with high-capacity donors.
No, fact.
Fact.
And I still have room to grow. And I can see where I have room to grow now even more, which is exciting for the future. So yeah, fact.
Fact.
Absolute fact.
Absolute fact.
Saw it.
That's incredible. So I really appreciate you guys taking time to just reflect on, it's kind of like when Israel crossed Jordan and they took 12 stones out so that they could stack them and everybody could reflect on what God did, the miracle he did. He truly did a miracle here.
Amen.
And I know you guys are so vision driven. You're handling so much of what God has given you that I love when you can just sit down and say, let's talk about what God did.
Amen.
Because God showed up and he showed out here. And it amazes me. But I watched you walk in faith. From a practical perspective, I watched you take the Injoy process and you followed the process. And like you said, you made it work for your culture and your DNA, which is so important, but you followed the process, and the process worked, and God showed up. I mean, if there's not a God factor in it, we're wasting our time, and we all know that.
Amen.
But if there's one last thing that you could say, looking back over the whole process, what would you be most grateful for out of the whole process?
I know they're sitting right here, but obviously a good team, a good whole staff, a great board. Where again, hey, a failure did not mean you don't get another chance to present or bring before us. It's just like, go and tweak it. This isn't it yet, right? We just have a great team, and I think it shows through the health and what our church is after, and that's to make more room for more people to find out about Jesus and to have their lives changed by what he did for them.
Yeah. Probably for me, I don't mean it to be self-serving, but on a more personal level, it's changed me. I remember in the 21-day journey, one of the early studies was on just stewardship and how we are not owners of anything. We are entrusted with gifts, resources, and we're called to be good stewards of those. Finances is certainly a portion of that, but your talents, your abilities, the impact you can have, it's a gift, and we have to be good stewards of that. And that's changed my mindset a bit, especially with finances. And my wife and I have had some fun conversations about how much we give and how much do we really need. And so this has changed me personally.
Pastor?
Personally, how it's helped me, and I had to go through my faith, our team and our leadership for sure, and my family. Who doesn't want their family to get to witness something that at the beginning you have a vision for God, and even your own family is like, Dad, and then you're like, but God. So I'm thankful most for that our family got a front row seat to watch God do something only he could. No one else could get the credit or the fame for it. Only God can.
You called Injoy because you needed to raise money. We're on the other side of it. And I asked all three of you, what are you most grateful for? And none of you said the money. That's pretty incredible. Amen. But God showed up and showed out in a great way. And it's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you all for your time today. I'm very grateful. And I can't wait to see this building start coming up out of the ground.
Thanks,
Thank you. God bless.